grateful for those who could attend this evening from our planning commission. I appreciate the good work you do. Thank you, council, for being here. It was great work. Hope everybody had a great holiday. So, in our meeting tonight, I'll have to excuse Councilmember Barker. He had another engagement this evening. And so I've asked Cody Watson, member of our planning commission, if he would give us a thought or an invocation, your option. And then please listen to the pledge of allegiance.
Our Father in heaven, we're grateful for this opportunity we have together, city leaders. We ask for thy spirit to be with us, that we may be able to make good decisions. Get along, we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Cody. I think everyone's had a chance to look at the items we'll be discussing this evening. Based upon our agenda, is there anyone that would like to disclose any potential conflict of interest they feel any of that? Seeing none, then we will move on to item number 2, which will relate to the city council. Council, as usual, Ryan has sent out the meeting minutes of our November 26th, 2024, and the December 3rd and December 10th city council meeting minutes. I believe you've had a chance to look at those and submit any corrections. Are there any additional corrections that may not have been submitted to Ryan? Okay, I see none. Then I would be looking for a motion to approve those reference minutes.
Mayor, I move that we approve November 26th, 2024, December 3rd, 2024, and December 10th, 2024 city council meeting minutes.
Thank you, Councilman Severin. Thank you, Councilmember Bowler. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of the city council, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. We'll now move into an active agenda. We do have some citizens with us this evening. If they would like to comment, they're welcome to stand, and we'll hear from them. If they would limit their comments to no more than 5 minutes and state if they're a resident of North Ogden, we'd appreciate it. And John, if we have some online, you let us know if there are any comments there. Any public comments this evening?
Yes, sir.
Okay. None online, John?
No online.
See none, so we will then move on.
Not so much a comment, but
Why don't you stand up and give us your name?
we have the mayor speak up, please.
He's probably speaking about as loud as we're gonna get.
You just cheer the chair right over there.
I will try to speak up.
I just retracted my comment.
All right. We're gonna move on to item number 4, and our Economic Development Director and Community Development Director, Mr. Scott Hess, will lead this discussion. This will be a discussion on regulations related to residential setbacks on restricted R-lot. Scott?
Thank you. So I'm hoping that this can be a discussion between the planning commission and the city council to gain some clarity and then also provide staff with direction forward on what we'd like to do. Planning commission heard this potential or this item on October 2nd. City council heard this item on November 12th and postponed the item, waiting for a further discussion with the planning commission essentially. So in our city, and this isn't unique just to North Ogden, but in our city, one of the things that we do when we develop a subdivision plat is we use a restricted or R-lot designation for any number of things. And this is one of the parts of the discussion in the planning commission that really changed this particular instance. We have R-lots, and John will have a few examples that he can pull up, but a lot might be restricted because it has high groundwater, or it has fault line issues, or is extremely heavy hillside slopes. It could be impacted by wildlife or other types of plant material that we may want to keep. And in cases with those R lots, it's a note on the plat, and then the hope is for us that the title companies find those notes, they tell that to the seller, and then the buyer of that property construct a home that meets all the requirements of the R lot. In this particular case, the thing that popped up about it, well, two things. If you go back to the ordinance that we were looking at changing, which the minutes ended up right in the middle of this staff report. So the ordinance 11, 9, and 6 is setbacks on lots 10% or greater slope. And John, you can leave this here, but I'm going to jump into the discussion on White Rock really quickly. So White Rock subdivision, which is off of North Ogden Divide Road or 3100 North, as far east as you can get before you start climbing up the hill out of the city. Phase 1 was originally developed, and it was understood that there were some steep lots on that subdivision, and the plat says a variance is required in order to reduce the front setback. And that would have required a variance for 20 homes. And so ordinance 11, 9, and 6, while Rob Scott was the planning director, was created that says on lots that have a 10% or greater slope across their average, you can reduce the front yard setback from 30 feet to 20 feet. And this is to help people get a backyard or reduce cuts into the toe of the hillside, or to just literally build a house on some of these lots. So when Paul Orchard came around, this lot 7R that you're being shown here is impacted by a utility easement that goes across. It's a power pole actually. And that power easement, as the power lines come across, have a vertical distance that you must meet from the peak of the roof away from the power line. So it essentially creates an artificial maximum height of the house for lot 7R. And it impacts so much of the building blocks of that house that what they wanted to do was push the house north and east. So reduce the north setback and the east setback both. And looking at this from just an R lot standpoint, staff's, really original consideration was when you have an R lot, let's potentially create the possibility of administratively altering setbacks in order to help people build houses that are reasonable, not overbuilding the home, that are essentially to fit a house on the lot. And that was the way the ordinance was proposed. So we wanted to change this to say setbacks on lots 10% or greater slope or with a restricted R designation may have front setbacks reduced from 20 to 30 feet, and just give people a little bit of flexibility. That would have allowed these folks to put their 20-foot on Monroe, and they could have gotten outside of that easement line. They ended up kind of scalloping the house or stair steps, so they were able to build the house. They were under a time constraint either way. But the planning commission discussion was really good because it was brought up the vast variety of reasons that our lots exist. So this isn't necessarily the catch-all ordinance. This isn't the right ordinance, most likely. And I think that the planning commission made the right call to say no. But these issues do still exist throughout the city for a variety of reasons. And so considering what to do with R or restricted lots in the future, as we're bringing this forward, thinking about it, you could have a menu of options. Like there could be types of R lots, or based on what the restriction is in the note, maybe we have an ordinance that gives us a menu of options that you can do. So if you're a restricted R lot because we don't want you to cut into the toe of the hillside that would undercut or undermine North Ogden Divide, that gives you kind of a series of rules and regulations you can have. If you're an R lot because of high water table, these are the things that you might need to do and deal with. So here's Spring Meadows subdivision at the end of 1500 North Street. Lot 8R was a restricted lot, partially because of the wetlands and also because it was where the temporary turnaround was located. So that lot was not buildable until a secondary access to the subdivision or another temporary turnaround was created. So we use our lots for all sorts of designations, kind of like if you buy one, it's buyer beware that there's something funky about this and you better check the plat, essentially. So in some cases, maybe staff is trying to solve issues for home builders, and we should allow the home builders to just come in and do a variance option on any of these onesie twosie things. But we also have run out of real easy pieces of ground to develop in the city. So we're going to continue to see these sorts of restricted lots or R lots or other designations. So it's worth having a discussion between the administrative bodies, the planning commission, and the legislative bodies, the city council, to say, help staff determine, should we be doing anything more from a code standpoint, or should we just leave it up to the variance process of administrative hearing on? And with that, I'll open up, give it back to the mayor, and help lead the discussion as needed.
Well, we have to fix it no matter what.
Councilmember Fulmer.
It's 15 and 10, right, in the wording?
Yeah, we do have this is one of several code changes or code fixes that we need to make, but, yeah,
So is it 10 or is it 15, I guess?
it's 10%.
Okay. Fixing it back to 10% and then, but then the other part is what we need to discuss, right? Whether or not it's a peanut butter spread across all. Sure. And I think planning commissioner said, no, I tend to agree with that because peanut butter spread is never a good thing technically. And I think individuals sometimes, unless, like you said, unless it's a whole area and then maybe, but anyways, I think so.
What other comments do we have?
My thought on this when we discussed it was, that, we're trying to wordsmith a bunch of ways to give people more flexibility to build on these, what was really a poorly designed subdivision. And I think some of the onus needs to go back on the designer of the subdivision to lay out a lot structure that fits the topography or whatever it is. And not just always say, hey, you can divide these up in these perfect cookie cutter squares. And so I don't have a whole lot of appetite to wordsmith anything in this area, really, but I'm one of many, which is an opinion. But I mean, where would you, in every one of these examples, that subdivision could have been presented differently.
I was just mentioning to John, we built a home up on 3625. I don't recall it being an R lot, but the slope was greater than 10%. But I don't recall seeing on the plat that it was an R lot. But
No.
I'm saying all those homes that are going up north, they're all gonna have the slope of 10% or greater, right?
Yeah, so we no longer put an R designation on lots with steep slopes because we've created a blanket ordinance that says if you have an overly steep sloped lot, you get this. This is a provision that we can now administer during the building permit process. So you could have pushed your house to 20-foot front setbacks in order to maximize your rear yard.
I'm thinking about moving it.
Nothing's impossible.
Yeah, there's a will. But I thought I heard you say if it is classified as a slope of greater than 10%.
Yeah, sorry, that was the original, the impetus of the code that we have, this 11.9M code, was coming out of White Rock. It was created, kind of born out of White Rock to avoid all these homeowners having to go through the pain of the variance process, knowing the variance would have likely been passed. So but our lots, we actually have 11-22-2 restricted lot development, a whole purpose and intent statement talking about our lots should exist to minimize hazards relating to flooding, erosion, drainage, steep slopes, rock formations, earth formations, topography, fault line, water table. It gives a whole bunch of reasons why we might use an R lot designation.
The 10% is really not one of them.
The 10, yeah, steep slope. R.
Defined as.
I mean, a single lot, a 10,000 square foot lot with 10% slope across is a pretty healthy slope.
I guess I'm just trying to think what the definition is
Yeah.
of a steeply sloped lot.
And you're getting to an interesting question that came up at the planning commission, which is, when does the R designation get applied to the lot? And it's during the planning commission's review of the preliminary plat typically. So planning commission gets to weigh in on why are we doing an R lot? And it's not just, they want to put an R lot designation on all lots so that we can just shrink those front setbacks. They have to come up with a geologic reason that meets this code as to why they're proposing it as a restricted lot.
Which is good, I guess, as long as there's some consistent application of it. Where we don't come back and somebody says, well, you let him do a setback of 20 feet, even though his slope is the same as mine. You know, I surely don't have a vote, but, you know, I don't like 20%, 20 feet setbacks in the front yard. I think that's what people see as they're going through our city. And, you know, to keep our city beautified, have proper landscaping, I don't know. I'm not sure I like the term, but I'd just have a smaller backyard, but I have a small backyard.
So I was wondering, is there any fuzziness to the 10% grade? Because I could see that at some point being a problem. Who determines if a lot is 10% grade or not? I could even see someone, you know, digging out a lot to make it greater than 10% to get around the rule. So any problems with that, or is that kind of a non-issue? Am I making up a potential issue? Any cut or fill over 4 feet has to be engineered. So you can go out and you can dig around on your own property up to 4 feet. You can embed a trampoline in the ground without getting a building permit. But much beyond that, you have to have a permit. So mass grading permit would be required if you really wanted to skirt the code that way specifically. And then the way we determine it is that one of the pieces of a building permit is a topographical of it. And so it has the highest point and the lowest point. So we usually get top back of curb, and then highest point is the lot, and it's literally just slope is rise over run, you know, in basic math. And we'll let you calculate that in any direction. So the 10%, we're pretty open and willing to administer that in a way that's favorable to a home builder so that they can get a house on a lot. And we haven't seen, as far as I've seen the last 4 years, people aren't using it to skirt around the rules. They're really using it to fit a house on the lot. And in some cases, that means a little bit larger house. But in North Ogden, we have some pretty good sized single family homes. But for the most part, I think people are just using it as a way to get homes built.
So how would a home buyer know if theirs was 10%, if they were even eligible for this? Do they have to call the city and does the city ever?
We won't tell them. So we would tell them to survey the lot.
Okay.
So they would go out and, you know, if you're
Pretty obvious.
Yeah, in 10% would be 10 foot of fall over 100-foot length. So if they're looking at the plat, think Frog Rock. So Frog Rock area, that Stone Ridge development, there's 3 lots left. And some of those are like 30% slope because you have about, I don't know, 20 feet of flat area, and then it drops off like 50 feet. And the lot's about 120 feet deep. So it's not obvious always, but it's, people will know.
Yeah.
I think we have Chad Bailey online that would like to make a comment, John, is he still with us?
Yeah, he's got his hand up, so he should be able to unmute himself as a panelist.
Yeah, like.
Yeah, I would just like to add, you know, kind of with, on top of what the mayor was saying, you know, the 30-foot setbacks are great for beautification, for front yards. And I've designed homes with some of these problems that we're discussing. And I guess I would just like to add one comment that maybe is a reason why it wouldn't be abused. It's when you go to a 20-foot setback, you're giving up a lot in terms of driveway and in terms of parking and things like that are important to people who are trying to build in our community. So I guess I'm just saying from that perspective, I would maybe qualm some worries about it being abused, because with moving your home closer to the street, it is a give and take. You're giving something up to do that. You know, like a pickup truck on a 20-foot driveway. I could bring this up as a problem too. You know, a pickup truck, the bumper hangs over on the sidewalk side. I guess I've got a good perspective here because I'm on a corner lot and the front yard of my house is 30 feet from the street, but I was able to do the driveway side of mine 20 feet from the street. And now 6 years later, I realized that was a concession that was not fully thought through on my side. So just a little snippet in there.
Yeah, sir, I think the
the discussion that we really had during our meeting when we covered this was when you put that R designation on a lot, it could be for any number of reasons. Slope being one of them, but it sounds like we have some kind of an ordinance that addresses that scenario specifically. So when a developer brings a subdivision plan before us to look at, you know, if there's power lines or if there's groundwater issues and they have some kind of an issue like that, you know, we would always look at, is it a buildable lot? If they've drawn a lot on there with lines, is it a buildable lot? And at the time it's approved, it's believed to be a buildable lot. So if something comes up later, like these power lines, where it turned out that there was a bigger problem than was anticipated by the developer at the time, there is a process in place through a variance in a unique scenario where somebody could go in and request a variance and would, it sounded like very likely be approved for something like that. And so, you know, it's like there is a mechanism for people to, you know, address a unique scenario that wasn't anticipated by the developer and or the buyer at the time. But I think if we just change it where every restricted lot now has this little leeway to have a 20-foot setback for any reason is really what we would like to avoid, because ultimately the issue in that scenario, it was not a problem with the city code. It was an issue with, you know, how it was designed in the first place. And, you know, things happen. People don't anticipate certain things. But there is a variance process that they could address that later. So it's not like they're just out of luck if, you know, there's some kind of unanticipated issue that comes up. But to say every restricted lot in the entire city, you know, could have a 20-foot setback, it just doesn't seem like the right answer for us because the flaw is really not in the city code.
So when it comes to the planning commission decides whether it's an R lot. No?
Yeah, well, actually, code section 1122(2) will help determine whether it's an R lot based on these criteria, but planning commission is the land use authority that accepts administrative subdivision applications. So
Okay.
the preliminary plat, that R lot is designated.
So the developer would present it to us
Yeah.
and they would say, okay, well, this power line goes through here and we've drawn these lots. And we want to fit 10 lots in this space. Rather than working around the power lines where we might only get 8 lots, if that makes sense, in their design. But because, you know, there is a buildable portion of that lot, but there's a restriction because it has this power line, they can't perhaps build on every corner.
Mm-hmm. I just wonder if there were ever a situation that would arise where when it comes to planning commission, you would recognize that there is a lot that really needs to have a variance before they even ask for it, before the builder even tries to.
We
squeeze
probably
around it.
wouldn't approve it.
Oh, okay,
Does that make sense?
Right.
Because it's really not a buildable lot.
okay.
And those are typically, those have been caught at the technical review committee. So
Okay.
before it even gets to planning commission, Jordan Park is a good example of a subdivision at the end of Mountain Road that connects, what's the road coming down? John, help me. Michelle Lane and Nebo. So there was a section where the road would have had to either cut 25 feet deep into the hillside, so you'd have had these huge sloped lots on either side, or allow them to make it a cul-de-sac, and so you end up with some kind of view lots, and then the lots below are at a different elevation due to the elevation of the multiple roads. And we caught that pretty quickly with the city engineer, who said these slopes aren't going to work and you're going to have unbuildable lots. Or, well, the question we asked was, prove to us that you can put a house and a building box onto this, and then they came back with a new configuration. It's not a perfect system, but there's enough checks and balances in place between streets department, public works, planning commission gets to see it, but still some sneak through. Like this one at Hall Orchard, that lot 7R probably should have been widened in order to create a bigger building box, given that it was so impacted by the power lines. But if someone builds a short house and they can retain 20 feet of vertical distance from the power line, then that's really not our call to say whether or not you want to tall house or a short house.
Johnson, do you have a?
I do, yeah. There's some points that I'll agree with and disagree with, mostly with you, because you know how I often do.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. It's starting to start out pretty fire.
Disagreement. Bring it on.
I think that the planning commission, in conjunction with planning department, I think we do a good job of catching these case studies, looking at it, maybe even making some suggestions. Sometimes you look at the person across the room and they're saying like, no, it'll work. And everybody, you can feel everybody in the planning commission saying, you're full of crap. It ain't gonna work, you know? And, you know, to commemorate the dead, you know, or soon to be dead, Eric had a good eye for that. He did. He had a really good eye for it because he saw the other side a little bit more. That being said, I think there's also been a number of things that planning has done that they have brought code forward that have helped us look at that. I think specifically with the 20 to 30 foot setback, it feels to me like North Ogden is not ready for that. And I would support that. I don't think we're quite ready for it either. I think making concessions on commercial things, maybe we need a little more tax money, making concessions on residential things. I think we still want 30 foot setbacks that look nice and pretty. Maybe one day that'll change. I don't know. But I do think my point is, I think that one of the things that's part of this discussion is, would there be times other than maybe a 20 to 30 foot setback that the planning department ought to bring things forward to make this code a little simpler so that it's not so costly for the city to evaluate everything on an exception? Because those things cost taxpayer dollars. Every time the planning department has to go through and work through a whole exception process, you know, we may be charging $9 grand for a permit or whatever it is now, 30 grand, I don't know. But like we may have spent $2,000 to $3,000 on the extra that went through the extra work. And so I'm not in support of 20 foot setbacks, but I would be supportive in general of the good work that the planning department does to continue to bring things forward in that code so that we can streamline it and make it simple. And maybe a little bit more on the commercial side than the residential side.
Hey, Scott, would the variance be at the builder's option? Because I'm just thinking about that along my street. So if somebody opts to go 20 feet, somebody opts to go 30 feet, yeah, that looks pretty funky to me.
Yeah.
And, I'm not as familiar with variances as some others in this room, but I remember someone saying there's not a lot of variances granted. They're hard to get. So to Johnson's point, you know, it takes a lot of time and effort and expense on, I guess, behalf of the builder to get a variance, which someone said isn't granted too often.
Yeah, you have to meet 5 specific state criteria and there are things like, just because you want it, you don't get it. It can't be because it's financially more beneficial to build it this way than that way. You still have to follow the rules. You have to have something very unique. So if you have a unique geologic reason, or in this case, you have a high voltage power line that crosses a significant portion of your lot, then the administrative hearing officer may have found that warrants a variance. But we never tell people a variance is a slam dunk. It's always, you never know how they're going to go. And that's a quasi judicial process. So that's like a judge hearing, essentially. It's our administrative hearing officer. And it gets all of you in the room out of that job, which is the best place possible to have that variance is held in a third party. And the applicant pays for it. So there's some sunk cost time and money and a staff report and things, but we do collect money for the variance process.
Scott, one other question, is the state in their discussions about affordability, are they talking about reducing setbacks to reduce the cost of lots, having to go that extra 10 feet? Have you heard any discussion?
No, we'll talk about that one in the next item, but it's been mostly parking reductions are a big thing for them. Surface parking is a cost that developers can quantify, and saying cities having minimum parking standards in
Right.
all sorts of residential.
So I was just
housing,
wondering,
but not
I hadn't heard anything, but wondered if you'd heard anything about them trying to reduce setbacks.
I feel like we have, taken a look at projects that were under like, development agreements where the whole neighborhood perhaps had smaller setbacks all the way around or narrower streets, but it was for a very specific project with some uniformity under a development agreement.
Yeah,
And we have been open to that and primarily due to smaller affordable housing.
Quail Ponds is a good example of that one. Mystery Meadows, which is John Hanson's development next door, has private streets in it. They're a little narrower. Cherry Springs Villas is kind of like quad home developed. That's over off of 150 East and 2600 North. So yeah, we've done that in two ways. One is you create a development agreement in order to write the rules and the sandbox for them to play in, or you write like there's a Quail Pond zone. And so that subdivision has its own specific zone that instead of going through a development agreement, it's one or the other essentially, but it created some code for them to do reduce setbacks, reduce side yard setbacks and small lots.
I just wanted to add that I think our thoughts have been summed up pretty well, but our consensus overall was just, it doesn't feel like there's a true problem here that we need to solve by carving out more zoning and regulation code for this. Was kind of ultimately our feelings, and I don't think anything's changed from what's been presented here, so that's all I wanted to add, which is I think we're
So what was kind of the intention of this? I mean, it sounds like things are going okay.
Yeah, so originally the intention was looking for a way to help a builder get a house on a lot that was impacted. So,
And do you feel like what we have in place right now is meeting that?
yeah, I think generally I think we do a really good job of administering and we have a code that works. So I don't know that we need any additional requirements. It was kind of it was at a developer's request and we went forward with this code language change and considered whether or not it'd be a good thing. And I think that through the discussion, we've determined that it was improperly placed in the R lot designation for where you might have those side yard and other setback reductions or changes. So at this point, staff would recommend following planning commission's recommendation, not amending the code. And we'll still ultimately need to bring it back to the council since this has been a postponed item for you to make a final determination.
So just to double on what Commissioner Webb was saying, if I understood him, he was kind of saying he would like the planning department to look into some additional ordinances potentially to address future situations. So the process of doing a variance wouldn't have to be gone through as much. Would you say that's an accurate or what did?
If I could clarify a little bit.
Yeah.
It's sort of that. I would say that I don't think that the staff needs to proactively look at it. But I do think that they ought to feel supported, my opinion, maybe everyone else disagrees with me, in bringing forward language when they see like, oh, if we did it this way, it's gonna save the city money. It's gonna be more friendly to development, especially on the commercial side. But in this particular scenario, 20 to 30 foot setback, I would say no. But I don't want the no in my vote there to say, hey, it's not a good idea for the city to keep, for staff to keep doing that. I think staff could keep doing it. And I think there's a number of examples where they brought solutions forward that has been really helpful and continues to streamline things for the city, for developers, for the beautification of our area, and so, but just in this particular 20 to 30 foot setback thing, I'd say, yeah, probably.
Okay. I did like what, I have the meeting fresh on my mind, the commission meeting, because I listened to it this morning, but, I liked, Commissioner Mason's thoughts on.
Somebody does.
Yeah, well, no, he's trying to make enemies, I'm trying to make friends.
He's an elected official. I'm appointed, happy to be fired.
No, but he acknowledged in the last meeting basically that, this might have been something that was somewhat missed in the process for approving that subdivision, the lot 7 and lot 11 or whatever it was.
they probably should have been positioned differently, so this wouldn't be a problem. And so I know that planning commission seats and city council seats only last so long, so we have to all make a commitment here that when the next phase of Hall Tree Orchard comes through, there's still a big, there's power lines going through it still. So let's make sure in the next one that we don't miss it, because we can clearly address it at that point. And then we just have to always be mindful of the next subdivision that comes through, but, I'm on board with what you're saying, about staff.
Like legally, they could still lay the subdivision out that way. They just have to be informed that this is unlikely to be a buildable lot.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because they could still make it a sellable lot. So
Well,
you can buy a
green
lot,
space.
Yeah, with no intention of putting the house.
Yeah, we can't tell
Yeah.
a builder how to build a house. I mean, if they wanted to sink the house in the ground and make it
Right.
really short, like. they
Nor could you
do
limit
that.
it just because it has this topography. Like if
You
it-
can also
if it fits
vary
the-
power plants,
Yeah.
be pragmatic.
Yeah.
But if it's
You can vary power.
if it's the
It
square
is.
footage, you gotta allow.
Right.
I mean, the best solution for that area, everyone has the right to build either a one level home or a two level home, depending on what's allowed, with their power lines. But, that neighborhood would be served well to have like a 55 and older where they're all, just one level, because then you just don't have to deal with it. But yeah, I hear you.
I have a couple questions. So on the variance process, from what I understand, it takes a really long time to do a variance, right? And does it also, oh, no, it doesn't. Okay.
I'll talk to you about the timing.
My other question was, does the cost of the variance and the delay of the variance fall on the home buyer or on the developer?
Either or. So for your last question, either or, and the cost is $685. So it's a nominal cost to do the hearing. Our administrative hearing officer is typically available within 10 business days. And so it hasn't been a long delay. Typically, the long delay has been in the hemming and hawing between, we find these in the building department. So building department will receive a set of plans, and that set of plans can, construct basically. And then they'll sit and go back, through 15 different iterations of plans or attempts to fix the thing administratively before ultimately going to a variance process is what we found. But getting through the variance, you're under 4 weeks and $700. It's not a huge time or financial commitment.
My other question was just, kind of along the same lines, would it be less work for the planning commission if it was streamlined a little bit more, if there were different types of R lots? Do you recommend keeping these as is, or reorganizing the process a little bit? There's this many variances.
I think it's still okay as it is, personally. I mean, with the kind of guardrails that we have in place between the slopes, lots of slopes greater than 10% having that front yard reduction. And you drive past a bunch of these and you probably don't even notice them. Honestly, they're all over the place. I mean, they're up and down the code. We've got a number of them that are the 20-foot front setbacks. And a lot of people, to Chad's comment, planning commissioner, they'll put the front of the house at 20 feet, but they'll suck the garage back another 5 or 6 feet so you can put a 4-door long bed pickup truck on the driveway without it overhanging the sidewalk. And then the other section 1122 of the code that covers R lots more generally, that just gives the whole laundry list of those eligible things in order to be considered an R lot. I think that works. And I can't think of off the top of my head or looking at the code what else we're missing, basically.
So just summarizing what I've heard here, not to beat a dead horse, is what I'm hearing is that there probably ought to be no action. That we leave the ordinance as it is, with a long-term vision of looking how we can kind of streamline things. Hopefully I didn't extract this wrong from your comments, Johnson, but I think when we do this, we have to remember it's a win-win. It's got to be a win for the homeowner or the developer, but the city also has to have a win in this. And sometimes we understand that, developers come and it's kind of a win situation, but we also have to make sure we're staying within property rights of the landowner. But I do believe that when we look at the changing ordinances, there ought to be a reason that benefits both parties. So is that a correct assumption that, so we don't continue just to beat it to death, that action will come before the council in the near future? Or probably no action needed if there's no change.
Yeah, we'll bring it back around from the November 12th postponement and let the planning commission make a final decision on the code.
Okay, is that fair?
Or you mean
Well,
council?
city council.
I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you. I'm okay with the planning commission.
You can put that on your docket.
You can make.
They would love to hash this out again.
You can legally make them the land use authority.
If you like to share the criticism. All right, any further comments on that before we move on to the next item? Okay, Scott, I believe you're gonna lead a discussion on regulations related to residential setbacks, to our general plan of moderate income housing.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Did our plan get approved? I haven't heard yet.
I haven't heard yet either.
Got rejected the first time.
Yep, so we're one of the several cities who had to submit a cure report on our moderate income housing plan. It's, I was offended personally. It's the first time in my 17 years of doing planning I've ever had one turned away, but I guess that happens. And Alyssa Gamble, who's worked at the Department of Workforce Services, her last day ended before the cure period reports were due. So they're working with another staff there. Our hope is that, one, we did a good job in the cure report, which we did because we had several conversations with the state before doing it. But the other is that they will accept those reports and move forward and not charge us the $300 a day fee that it would be. So it's about a $90,000 penalty for the cities who do not have compliant moderate income housing plans. That would be monies extracted out of your B and C road funds, which for our city pays for things like potholes, sidewalk improvements, and basically Bowen Koenig's entire job as the street superintendent. So all that fun sidewalk connection and road money, overlay money that we get, we would have a huge hit to. So
Scott, would you share maybe with the group why it was rejected, what their concern was?
well, I took all my sticky notes off my computer off here, so I've got a few things, but it was mostly just in detail. They wanted additional detail. So we have done significant work in accepting rezones, accepting annexations, applying multifamily zones. But where they wanted more detail is why it hasn't necessarily produced housing. And the answer essentially from me in my first report was, I can't grab a developer's hand and force them to write a check for $3 million to pull a project out of the ground. And I didn't give them enough information. So when I had my discussion with Alyssa, she basically said, lean heavily on your ongoing work that you've done, which is a 2022 adopted future land use map, and then all of these rezones that have come in, and just provide additional details.
Scott, I was on Zoom with the meeting yesterday, and I think it was quite obvious. Discussion is, interest rates and costs are what's stopping these projects from getting out of the ground.
Sure.
Both of which we don't have any control over. So I find it quite amusing that the state would ask why these projects aren't working.
Yeah, and given that our city is right now with entitled units, we're over 27% of the total city is some sort of connected unit. And it's even that plus. So you add the 300 in the annexation that's been accepted for West States, and you're starting to cross into 28, 29% territory of the city that's connected units. So, for me, and I would lean on our city attorney, if the state came back and said, no, you do not comply, I would think we'd probably write a pretty strongly worded letter about, show us how we have been an obstruction to moderate income housing in our city. And when you have projects like Village of Prominence Point that were approved, some parts of that 10 years ago and still haven't come out of the ground, we have no impact. We can't force somebody to spend their money and do it.
And that's a lot of units.
That's a lot.
I think we did that special zone for the old property over by the Public Works.
Yeah.
And the developer found out he couldn't build them, sell them in the market.
Yeah.
Conditions, so.
And then that's a great example too, because we went small lot, single family, which they could have said, well, you really didn't do enough. And then what we did is turned around and changed it to R4 and allowed a townhome project with reduced setbacks in order to help the developer get a project built. So that was one where, again, I went back and I just provided additional detail and made the report longer. Maybe they just wanted the report longer.
Well, it was interesting, the mayor from Draper was there.
Yeah, Todd.
Yeah, he's the president of the Utah League of Cities and Towns, and he said a lot in his city.
Yeah.
Was what, 1.5 million now
Yeah.
for the lot? With what basically they've got left, they have control over, so it's pretty tough to meet moderate income housing. And, you know, we're not too far behind the move. An acre of ground in our city is probably what now, 500,000?
Lots are pretty close to 2, so it depends on where you're at, but you can take the value of the lot. And that's what an acre costs. So a improved lot is about the cost of what an undeveloped acre costs. So 200 to 400, because up on the hill, they're $400,000 and $500,000. Just few lots.
Oh, yeah. But I think the state's starting to recognize, you know, why these aren't coming out of the ground, right? Of course, then they refer to all the programs they have to help,
Yeah.
right?
And we'll talk a little bit about that meeting, I think, but John brought this up with me and we've talked about, I believe, the city council, a form of the city council, probably back in about 2022, and I don't know how much it's been talked about since then, has talked about vesting the general plan. And vesting the general plan could mean that the general plan you see right now from 2022 essentially doesn't change, and we apply real zones to these kind of blobs on the map. And so when a developer comes in and asks for a rezone, if it's in line with the general plan, it is a legislative decision. The council would have to weigh in on it, but it essentially would say, yes, we've made this decision once, so now we're going to honor it and we're going to move forward. And it would speed up the process of rezones and speed up the process of annexation requests. This has been done in other states. California, which I'm not going to use any California examples, because that's, you know, it's like a 4-letter word sometimes. But in Western and Eastern United States, we're seeing concurrency requirements. That's what they're called. So it's essentially vesting the general plan. But if you do a Google search for concurrency requirements as it affects general plans, one that I thought was pretty interesting comes out of Bellingham, Washington, which you've ever been to, is real nice. I mean, it's a city, it has downtown, it's a little bit suburban or a little rural around it, but Bellingham isn't a huge community. And they have a concurrency requirement, but what it focuses on is transportation concurrency. So they say, we'll give you the rezone and the density that you want, but the transportation system surrounding the project within a certain area has to be up to handling it. And if it isn't, you have to have funding in place that will build it within 6 years. So there's some specific concurrency requirements for that developers have to follow. And that might be things like, say we get a state grant to help us widen, well, when we widened Washington Boulevard, right? That was a state grant, it was about 6 years out. It would say, you can get this rezone, but this thing better be built within this time frame because we know that the development, the growth, and the people are coming. So concurrency requirements, as far as my research goes, is along the lines of things like open space preservation, utilities and infrastructure. For North Ogden, I think a huge one is culinary water as you march up the hill. You know, say any of that development west of the Cove and north of Long Bench wanted to go any denser than the current development agreement has been signed. One of their biggest limitations that they have up there is the ability to provide culinary water. So we would say, sure, maybe we'll accept the density because we're going to get a park out of it or some other trade-off, but you have to build the water system and have the water in place as the units come in line. And it's not going to leave the city holding the bag for now being underwater on fire flow, which is where our water tank was over on 2100 South. And the reason that we built from a 1 million to a 2 million gallon water tank is we had run out of capacity for, the water was fine. Everybody's tap would turn the water on and have water, but if we'd have had a major structure fire, we no longer met the state's requirement for fire flow and water preservation. So we ate the cost of that tank upgrade because it was an existing tank. Of course, impact fees and other things help pay for that. And we were prepared, we knew it was coming, but that's when these decisions, especially with new growth, come along because, you know, we might march along and build 10 years worth of growth up the hill and then realize all of a sudden we hit a point where we're underwater in something like culinary ability to serve culinary water. So that would be maybe the concurrency requirement or the vesting of the general plan that we might.
And Scott, actually, all the citizens are paying for that tank right now.
That's true, that's it. Is it a
Depreciation,
water rate?
yeah, or in the water rates to prepare us for the next tank, because we were lucky this time because we had ARPA money, right? Else we would have been in a real interesting situation. One of the things I think, Scott, that maybe, if I understood it correctly, that may result in us kind of delaying vesting of the general plan is the discussion on ownership. There was quite a discussion, you know, they acted like it was kind of a new concept, but whether the state is going to look at heavily requiring ownership in these zones, so to speak. But right now, the law prohibits you from only doing that in a development agreement. But they're really laying heavily on that. I'm wondering at some point in time, they're not going to require certain zones that structures, X% of them are available for ownership. And that may be just one of the conditions of the zone, right? Because right now you can only do it with a development agreement. And we've done that in the last two, but we really expressed, thought myself, me by chat and you in person, is that we're getting a lot of pushback at 20%.
And that deed restriction only lasts 5 years.
Yeah.
So for planning commission members who haven't maybe been as involved in the development agreement process, the Century Farm subdivision, and then the West States annexation, which you'll see as a site plan, the subdivision process and the site plan, starting at Century Farms, when it went from a small lot, single family homes to a townhome development of about 60 or 60, so 62 townhomes. The requirement in that rezone was, we'll allow you to do it, but 20% of the units have to be owner occupied, deed restricted for 5 years. So we'll have a 5-year stretch where a BlackRock or a Redfin or some other, like a major company, can't come in and buy up all 62 units and run it as a short-term rental or a rental home community, essentially. But we got major pushback at anything beyond 20%. The project would have fallen apart. And then that was similar to West States, with West States annexation, because it was a mix of townhomes and 3-story apartments. We didn't even quite get to 17% of the total building or the total housing units on the project. We ended up with 27% of the townhomes, but I think on the average, it was like 17% of the whole project is what ended up being deed restricted to owner occupied for 5 years. And I know Matt Dixon, city manager over in South Ogden, he has negotiated several of these deals. Farmington City, with a lot of the development going on around Station Park, has negotiated several of these deals. And the state is looking at it as one of the tools of ownership. So that's one potential. And then the other thing to be aware of that's coming down from the state, and there's rumblings and I think some drafted code, but we haven't seen a code yet, is that there might be an obligatory upzone requirement. We might have an R18 or R110 or R12.5. So that's 5th acre, quarter acre, and 3rd acre lots, essentially, where it says you can get 1.5 times the density, but the boxes that end up on the ground have to be sold for and then have a ceiling, you know, or a floor, essentially, that they've got to be sold at a ceiling. You know, that you can upzone an R18 to an R15 without the legislative process. It's an automatic upzone, but you have to be able to sell the units at and meeting an area median income requirement or a certain value. And that is, it's slightly less scary to me because I honestly just don't think the economics will work in North Ogden. I don't think that there's a cheap enough piece of ground in order to sell single-family standalone boxes at $450,000 on any sizable piece of ground.
But what are the neighbors getting in that scenario? More density, which they don't like, and cheaper building, which nobody likes.
Well, you need to talk to your legislature, because I mean, this is stuff that's coming down from the legislature that we will have that we'll have to comply with. You know, and years ago, there were cities there was like upheaval over the legislature taking away cities' ability to say you have to have 30% stucco and rock, and, you know, we used to require all this stuff of single-family homeowners' homes. And then the building community cried foul that we were causing homes to be more expensive, and that, you know, they would build them out of cheaper siding if we would allow them. And then ultimately they really haven't done that anyways. So there's several different paths coming from the legislation that is coming down the line that we'll have to think about in the ways that we apply our upzones and rezones in the city.
And that's my point. Until we see that come through, do we want to invest this? Because it may result in some tweaking of, what's the matter? Sorry. Oh, Johnson.
I have another comment to be Mr. Loudmouth tonight. I mean, these things from the state are gonna come, you know, and to be a bit cynical about it, there's money changing hands, big time money changing hands on this. And there are certain communities that are gonna be raped and pillaged, you know, with that. They won't be ready. Developers know where they're at right now. And I'm not saying developers are bad, they're just trying to make a living. I think one thing that this really shows is the time efficiency in which we plan or have planning meetings. We need to keep looking at this general plan. We need to keep looking at the vacant space that we still do have and making some pretty good plans of what do we really want there? Because if we don't do that, we will be told what is going to happen.
And I
So
think
you're aware of the county, Weber County is trying to approach this from a county perspective. And it's, as the mayor from Draper said, you know, he was pretty hot on the legislature trying to, you know, force all these things when there's been so many entitled lots. There's more entitled lots in the state than there is a shortfall of housing. By almost double, as I recall. Wow. But what's causing this problem, frankly, is you've got cities like Plain City, far west, that want no density in the city. Zippo. Of course, you know, people that come from that area, Plain City, they're a little off.
Went to school with a lot of them.
That's a joke, it's Johnson, Plain City. But I think, you know, they're trying to figure out, instead of kind of punishing everyone, so to speak, they want to figure a way to deal with these cities that are just not doing anything.
Yeah.
But we're trying to approach it from a county standpoint and submit a plan to the state, because from their perspective, they don't think we're doing anything. You know, and they try to blame everything onto the cities. And, but I think they're starting to see the light now. And so I guess my, you know, once again, just my perspective is that, you know, to vest this plan may be a little bit premature on what's going on. But I do think we need to continue to look at this, because I think the compliance of affordable housing is just going to get tougher and tougher. But, you know, when our land costs are so heavy, there's just, it's hard to do. So I think maybe hopefully realization will set in with some of the legislation.
Well, and 90 grand is real money. I mean, they have mechanisms to take money away from us. You know, 90 grand to cover our potholes is something we need. You know, and if we're not looking at it, we end up losing money because we're just behind the 8 ball. That's tough.
But if you think about it, the primary reason our plan was rejected is because these entitled lots aren't coming out of the ground.
Yep.
You know, do they expect, I guess we could triple everybody's property tax and then subsidize ground. That would go over bad.
Yeah.
So, you know, I really think, John would write a really nice letter with some pictures drawn on it.
hand signals.
But, because we just don't have that control.
Yeah,
And that's the primary reason we got denied. I mean, we have a good balance. I think the previous, city councils and the current city councils have been pretty cognizant of trying to balance this thing out.
Yeah.
And I think we've got a good balance. When you look at almost 30%,
of the total connected units.
that's quite a jump from where we were probably 10 years ago.
Sure.
So I think we're doing our part. It's just that I think there's some unrealistic expectations, and we'll continue to try to work on those to get realism into the.
And to give planning commission and city council a heads up, John, if you'll scroll down to that 1A location, so some of the ideas back from 2022 that had come up were reinstating two-family dwellings. So right now we allow single-family home with an internal accessory dwelling unit by right in every single-family zone. That's a state code. The state is looking at probably minimum lot size requirements for when an external ADU is required or permitted. We right now require 20,000 square feet, so you have to have a half an acre before you can get an external ADU. And the state's thinking it's probably closer to 10,000 square feet, which would open up almost our entire city to those. And I'm not super opposed to it because there are some really nice like prefab 20 by 20 structures that you can just drop in and hook up to utilities, and people could begin monetizing their backyards in areas where it might work. But in areas that might make sense to re-implement two-family dwellings with maybe the right, bumpers or code language around them so that they don't turn into problem areas, code enforcement problem areas. I think that would make sense. The old town area of the city, the residential city center zone forever was permissible for two-family dwellings. And that changed 10 years ago or so now, a little less, 8 years ago, but it was changed before housing really went nuts and prices went so bad that there were some problematic duplex areas in the city. And that was stripped away as a use. But I think that in some of these lots, these infill areas where you're next to some 1960s or 70s homes, you've got older homes in the area, you're going to be less likely to invest $1 million in a brand new standalone single family home. But a developer might come in and build one really nice right size scale duplex and sell it as a shared wall construction. And then you'd be able to hit the low fours and have somebody buy a home. And of course, it shares a wall and half of its roof with its neighbor, but so does half of Lakeview. And the Lakeview subdivision on the west side of Washington Boulevard, as you march up the hill, if you go drive around in there, there's a lot of them, and there's some really attractive two-family dwellings in there. And I don't think those take away from North Ogden as a nice community of homeownership. So it's something that we want to look at again as staff and bring back to planning commission and city council to maybe pinpoint some areas where it might make sense to have that minor, it's not even a density upgrade in my mind. It's more just provide housing choice in those areas.
I think the old town is a really smart area. You got some big lots in there. There's some houses that need to be remodeled. I can easily see a younger couple moving in, putting an ADU in the backyard, remodeling one of those houses. A little bit of youth in there. There's a nice little elementary school. There's a nice park. I think the old town area is definitely an area to consider for something like that. As long as the parking works.
Right. And that's another thing the state is right now with the internal ADUs, you can require one additional parking space, which we do. And in North Ogden, almost all single family homes, you can put 3 cars on either in the garage or on a driveway. So the one extra parking space hasn't been a big deal, but there's some real obstinate cities out there that are saying things like, well, if you want to build an ADU, you have to provide another driveway and 2 additional covered parking stalls. Like they're really trying to not have this happen. And it's those bad actors that are causing all this state legislation to come down on cities that are being really pretty moderate and reasonable, I think, like North Ogden is. And I think we're trying, I would say the council has done a lot. We have entitled far more multifamily units while I've been here than single family units, by far.
And Go ahead.
Just a simple question, the ADU can be a quote mother-in-law basement that's cordoned off that literally an entire family could live in, really.
Yep.
So that's what,
And yeah,
That's
that- and
internal.
that's today. So, and that's
Right.
internal. So if it's share wall construction or attached to
or
the
just a
home,
basement.
we
Yeah.
can't say no. So you have upstairs, basement, whatever, like that is a permitted use in all zones now. You can require home ownership. So one of the units has to be owner occupied. So someone who lives on the property has
Right,
to
we were talking about.
occupy it. But you know, any one of you can convert your basement and start renting it. And we'll give you a permit tomorrow.
And we actually did that 2 years before the state required us to. And I think if we've tracked it, I mean, we've had, I was gonna say 30, 40 people that have actually done that. You know, what it's done is brought some people into compliance, you know, that had already done it. And then it's allowed 30 or 40 people to, you know, I mean, I have a friend who did it. They bought a new house that had space and then turned that into an apartment so they could afford the house.
Those are the ones we know.
Yeah. and
Right,
that-
yeah.
And that's last year in the report I got from Pauline Phillips, the permit, and this is the detail that they wanted, just additional detail. So I got the permit number, the rental permit number, the contact information, that's all been built into the report I sent to the state now to show that, yes, we did accept this permit, we approved it, we did a rental license for it, and there were 5 of them, I think, is what it ended up being. So we're not seeing them, you know, floodgates didn't open up with people renting their basement out. But the number of doubled up families that we know we have in our city right now, where you've got adult children living with their parents because they can't afford a house, that's a lot. And that's not counted as ADUs.
Yeah.
You know,
But
that's just,
the pushback in the discussion was, for instance, in our case, we think build out's like 42,000 people.
Yeah.
It may be 50,000. And do you have the infrastructure, water wise, road wise, school wise, leasing wise?
Sure.
To handle that? You'd be, for some here, they'd be interested, the mayor brought up the policing effort on what happens in high density, didn't he?
Mhm. Yep.
He talked about rentals versus ownership. So the mayor, all mayors are nuts, I guess is what I'm saying. But that's the pushback. You know, you've got to look at it and say, okay, it's a good idea. But when it comes to reality, how does the city deal with an expected build out of, say, 42,000, and maybe become 50,000? So we have to, but that was the pushback is on infrastructure. Okay, cities on how do we do that? So-
And one thing that Scott and I talked about, you know, specifically when you're talking about the police issue is if you concentrate rentals, then you typically, that's when you see a more noticeable spike, right? I mean, there's always going to be, but the integration of rental into neighborhoods creates a much more holistic approach. And that's why the backyard ADUs work, because you've got 2 people on the same property, a renter and an owner, and the 2 of them together create a better situation than if you had 2 renters. And so, you know, that's one of those things that in the general plan that there may be some discussion about is there a way to create density across zones that mixes, and I always call it the avenue zone, right? You've got these little 3-story walk-ups that have 8 units, 9 units in them, right next to a single family home that's $1 million. Totally different time periods, everything. They don't blend, but in the fabric of the avenues in Salt Lake, it works. And it'll be hard to recreate that here, but if we can do some density or some clustering in our zones so that we get better green space, then even the renters, I hate to say that it'll get a premium, but the landlords won't need to take whoever can come in with a check. They can be picky because there's amenities that the city has helped facilitate around. And so it's just, there's things we can do to make it work no matter what the state does to us. But I also think that the mayor is correct that there's this tension building at the state where it's finally gonna come from the league's push, more likely than anything, the League of Cities and Towns, saying, hey, the cities are doing what they're supposed to. Yeah, there's a few outliers. There's a mayor in Plain City who just says no multifamily, but look at what Pleasant View and North Ogden, look at what all these other cities are doing. And right now, we're lucky in Weaver County, we're not on the radar, we're not this target, but we're there. We are next in line for the target, and we are most likely gonna be the poster child. So if we can get out ahead of it, then we'll be better off, and, you know, but some of it might feel painful.
I agree with that type of design, that we need to be looking at that sooner rather than later. Land costs are only gonna get more expensive. And as it gets more expensive, it will be harder to do that. It will be harder to force the green space that we want. You know, in the development behind me, there are 3 of those 12, whatever they are, new construction houses that are multifamily. 2 are 2 younger couples who decided right away to build a rental in their basement so they could afford the mortgage and get out in front of it. They're smart couples, college graduates. You know, they just knew this is what we need to do. One just had a baby, one has a couple of kids. The other one is some parents and married children who are going to build separate homes. And because of a disabled child that was born, they decided to do it together and design the house that way. I would prefer to see North Ogden have more of what you're talking about, John, than that type of scenario. But that type of scenario is happening. It's happening more than it's being reported. It'll happen in every new development that we have in North Ogden, that type of thing will happen. Smart young kids are saying, I'm buying a house and I'm renting a basement house. That's the only way I can afford it.
Because they're finding other solutions for moderate income housing, right?
Yep.
I mean, the market's driving some solutions that the city is not having to solve for them.
Zero rent is moderate. The parents are letting it's moderate.
You need Scott.
Any other comments?
I just have a question. Is there a limit to how many renters can be under one roof of a single family home?
The state, no, the state has an ordinance for what constitutes a family, but I would hesitate, we would have to prove that you aren't a family. The places that, well, I'll pick on Rexburg, for instance, like BYU, Idaho. That's a city that has some caps on the number of individual renters that can exist within one home, because they're renting like closets for college kids, so they're sticking air mattress in them. And that's more a fire life safety thing. But when applying those ordinances, I'm always very sensitive, because it would come down to the city proving that, hey, you 5 unrelated looking persons, are you or are you not a family? And really what constitutes a family, what, a family unit. And so we are very sensitive.
I guess I just mean, like, if an owner were able to rent out every single room to a different tenant, and then there's 7 cars in the driveway, is there something against that? No.
They're doing it now.
As long as they
I know, I was gonna
operate
say.
like a family unit. So they couldn't divide their house into 7 little apartments that have laundry, kitchen, everything. As long as, but like you can have your room locked and then you share common space. That's the rule we use. There has to be shared common space, laundry, cooking,
But we limit dogs.
But but to the other point, Councilmember Watson, and maybe this isn't unique to West Kaysville, but the number of homes in my neighborhood that have like 7, 8, 9 children and 7 cars right now, and that's one family, like it's more than I would have expected, right? And so that's an issue regardless. Like,
Right.
it's a renter issue, it's a just homeowner issue. We have large families in Utah, and you're gonna have some of those homes that just have cars that seem to bleed out on the street all the time. Regardless.
I don't think we should pick on people with lots of cars.
Hey.
Like, I'm just saying.
I'm sorry, 1 car per person with lots of people.
I think we should purchase more cars.
We're 2 families. So is there any other, Blake?
Well, I was just gonna say, Mayor, thank you. So Scott, I'm just kind of curious, so that I can take this conversation back and think about it. What was your thought? Earlier, you said something about an encouragement to vest the 2022 plan.
I think that, well, I guess it's we've talked about it a lot. John and I have talked about it, and mostly it's because we want to reduce time. We want to help developers feel confident in their decision to bring rezones forward. But to the council, planning commission and the council's credit, this is a city that follows its general plan. You have done an excellent job in following the general plan. And there are cities that are out there operating on 20-year-old general plans, and they're making legislative decisions like just thumb in the wind. And that is not North Ogden. We have very well thought out current general plan, and everything I've seen, you have all very, even rezones that have been denied have been considered heavily against what the general plan says. So I don't know that we need a vested general plan. We just need to continue to refine it, as some planning commission members have said, and just follow it, basically, when it comes to the planning.
And the risk is, and this goes to what Johnson had said earlier about tweaking it and keeping it up to date. The risk is the state will step in and say, all your general plans are vested, so what you have is what you got, and we're adding a density bonus to it. So like if they came and said, we're gonna give everybody a density bonus, there'll be 4 or 5 cities that'll go in and scrub all their ordinances and say everything is now down zoned to half-acre lots. So yeah, you can have your quarter-acre lot. It's good, congratulations, state. But I think the state will say, we're gonna vest you in your general plan and give the density bonus. And so keeping an updated plan doesn't necessarily mean we have to vest it. We just have to know that there's a risk that whatever's on this colorful sheet of paper, we may be locked into at some point by the state.
So, based on what I read from your dad's book, right, the, what's it called?
Citizens Guide.
No, the ground one?
Common Ground, Citizens Guide to Land Use
I
Planning.
think so. That doesn't sound familiar, but anyhow, I've been going through that book. So once we vest. Well, I mean, and I appreciate Scott's, because our council's been pretty involved in that process with the general plan. According to that book, as I recall, the city has to follow the exact same stipulations that the general plan entails, right? So we can't go in as a city and change. I mean, we can do some zoning adjustments, but typically once that's just set, we can't really make too many adjustments. But the state they can come in and make a decision based on our vested plan.
We're a political subdivision of the state, so they can set a rule that says this now applies to all of our political subdivisions.
Interesting.
So, I mean, they could come in like Milwaukee or Wisconsin. Well, it was Milwaukee, but Milwaukee just came in and said, there's no more single family zones. Everything is fourplexes.
Minneapolis. Minneapolis was the first one that did that. The state came in and eliminated single family zoning altogether. Everything was duplex, and then in I think Portland has every lot gets up to 4 boxes. So you can have essentially a home with an ADU and a detached ADU with an ADU.
So I guess I'm just trying to explore this a little bit. So there's really not a value in quote unquote vesting a general plan?
Vesting, in my opinion, what it does is it makes it predictable. So we lock it in, and then neighbors know that what's coming in next door isn't gonna change, in the sense that the plan is the plan. And because then you set it with the developers, you say, developers, you can only get what the general plan says. You can't come in and ask for more, because we'll tell you no, because the general plan is what you get. So that's some benefit. It speeds up some timing in some areas too. But I think the biggest thing about it is it forces this mind shift of taking the general plan from this conceptual, it's gonna guide us to this is our 50-year plan. And so we're gonna care, we're not gonna look at this, if I can get if I could zoom in. We're not gonna just take this yellow blob. That yellow blob is 5 different zoning types. And right now, a developer can come in and ask for any of those 5s, and under the general plan, we can say, sure. In my opinion, it'd be better if there was only 1 or maybe two zones available for each color, because then the neighbors know I built in this color zone, my neighboring property is this color zone, so it's gonna be the same thing. But
And the fear with doing something like that, and I believe that Rainy Homes has really good intentions over at Whitfield Farms. And I know that some of the neighbors have had some pushback, but the area between 600 East and future Monroe that has been in flux in their planning there, and they've got some single family homes. John, if you want, that southern area south of 1700 North, but if you were to vest it into your zone that you are eligible for, it's R18. And that's essentially it. It could potentially kill creativity in areas where creativity might be warranted, like next to an 80-foot road that we don't want driveways coming on and off of, like Monroe, where you might say, well, the trade-off is we get a little park space down there and some open space, but we have some connected townhome type of units. So I go back and forth. Like on one hand, I like the predictability. On the other hand, I do like a developer, their ability to be creative and bring a project forward that requests the rezone. And that would require maybe a general plan amendment and then a rezone and the full entire development entitlement process. But it just doesn't immediately kill creativity. And that's what could potentially happen, because we can't, we could sit in here and play with the general plan for hours and hours and still not get everything right. And someone's going to come in with an idea that's slightly different, and sometimes they might be good ideas, and we'd want to consider them.
So we kind of danced around it a little bit. There's two big things. Annexation, which kind of danced around. The general plan, I think, has some good thoughts in there and what to do. Kind of really haven't executed on it. I guess that was my first question is why not push? And then the other part is zoning, like you're saying, along Washington, you look both sides, there's a lot of just empty farm stuff, especially around the 17, so, right now it's zoned mixed use, right? And not commercial. And so to me, one of the biggest things I wrote down and what, when we build it out, the only way, if we don't have commercial, which is going to be higher property tax and including sales tax on top of it, we're not going to have any type of generation if we just stick 4-story apartment complexes on it. It's not going to help. And so every year we're going to be raising property taxes based on that. So me, in my opinion, is we need to be focused not just on housing and how do we make higher density, but also where are we putting stuff that has to be commercial? Like, no kidding. This has to be commercial, or, we're dead as a city. We're going to be constantly raising property taxes, and we're going to be, anyway. That's just something that's kind of been on my mind, and as you drive through, it's like, there's no way. Like you said, you can't force somebody to put a shovel in the ground and make it a Maverick, up the street. There's a dead zone literally between Smith's and Walmart. There's nothing there. And we can't make a walkable city when there's nothing in between. And that's the thing that you read the general plan, oh, it's better be walkable. Where?
Yeah.
Anyway.
And you've got all along Village of Providence Point has been commercial, and
Nothing.
they've got stubbed utilities. Those are ready to go, ready to build anything. And it's taken 8 years and they haven't been able to get anything, to the point that the council
Isn't
permitted.
it Brandon's fault that we didn't have these black towers?
Why am I the bad guy?
Literally the quietest he's ever been in a meeting.
Well,
Yeah, it's a really good caveat, because I have that same concern too.
Yeah.
City budgeting is a three-legged stool: property taxes, sales taxes, and the fees that we charge. And so we have to continue to think about how we balance that three-legged stool as the city doubles in size. And that is going to be preserving commercial, one. But the other thing is places like Kings Plaza that are a sea of parking, are underutilized, are under sales tax generating, will have enough value in them when there are enough rooftops surrounding it. It's this like shell game, right? So you build enough rooftops, and those rooftops are going to force the property values in the commercial areas high enough to create redevelopment. It's a back and forth. Like, we can zone up and down Washington all we want and hope and pray for strict commercial. The days of like 1950s era, just one, your city is a wall of strip commercial are essentially gone. Like it's more centered development now. So we need to be more thinking about developing centers that are
Well,
sales tax.
And that's my point. I think we talked a little bit about it at West States when they were like, oh, we don't have anything on the, because we would have done something and then the guy came in later like, oh, you know. So I guess my point is are they even attempting to talk about combinations and a lot of these people like they're trying to develop Buffalo Smiths there that it took 150 years or whatever to develop that land. And that's the same thing. You see a lot of other old landowners that want nothing to do with North Ogden. And I'm going to keep this farm until I die and my kids are going to die. And so there's nothing we can do about it. And I guess that's the point is there a point in a city's life where you have to say, do something, or I don't know, I guess the property rights kind of overarches all of this, right? And then so there's nothing.
We used to use RDA dollars to incentivize, and we are limited by the state legislature now in our ability to put RDA property tax reinvestment dollars into sales tax producing entities essentially. So we can't zone for dollars anymore like we used to. I mean, I'll just say it because there's no one in the room from it, but like Layton bought a lot of sales tax dollars through RDA investment. So they helped bring big box stores to their city by incentivizing them and subsidizing them. They've made a bunch of money doing it. So I think we should annex Riverdale.
Well,
all the car sales. I mean, if we just annex down.
The problem is, I mean, I thought my wife had done something because she screamed and yelled so loud. But when we found out that Trader Joe's is going by where the old Shopco is, I thought I was gonna get shot. So, you know, I mean, there's certain things that as a planning commission and, you know, the body, you know, I mean, there's some really good stuff in the general plan that says, hey, we should actively do this, and that. You know, we talked about clusters. That's in the general plan. So I guess my point is at what point do we execute on what is in there? I
think there's a lack of misunderstanding.
Maybe.
Scott's a planner better than I am, but I came from the industry where rooftops matter, but it's not the only thing.
Yeah,
It's traffic patterns.
yeah. I mean,
And the sooner we recognize that we're a destination city, we're not a pass-through city.
Yeah.
That's what makes it difficult. They got Trader Joe's because they had that flow, plus they had a vacant building to put them in.
well, there's no vacant buildings, Ashley, but anyway,
No, they're going in where Shopko was.
right. Ashley's is where his Shopco is.
Shopko's vacant.
I think about
Yeah, Shopko's vacant.
other side of the door.
But
You mean?
the fact is that just because you have a lot of population, that's a misnomer. It's,
Okay.
traffic flow has as much to do with it. And that's the problem with Washington Boulevard. Why do people come along Washington Boulevard? Get home.
Yeah.
Now, 2700 is a little bit different because it's off the freeway exit. But the fact is, that's the reality of what we're facing. And Councilmember Pulver will tell you that I sent him a thing, North Ogden's property tax, 6% of it comes from non-residential. Harrisville, conversely, 16% comes from non-residential. But they've got that flow of 89 that goes through there.
Right.
So not that it can't be done, but I don't think people recognize the fact that we're a destination. And, you know, we've had commercial property available for forever. In fact, if you'll recall, those who were on the council at the time, we had the battle with Cooperstown, right? Because it's a master plan community. A master plan community requires commercial. We had the same thing with Patriot Point. They wanted to do it with no commercial. We finally forced them to do some commercial, and they're responsive. We'll do it, but probably never fill it.
Someday they'll put it in.
But to the point, we've got to look like you're saying, Chris, down 20, 30 years. But, you know, the reason Pleasant View is getting those businesses because they're right off the freeway.
Yeah. Our beautiful mountains limit where we can drive our cars.
We're in a corner.
Yeah, we're in a corner. That's just, it's.
But we don't give up on it.
Well, I
And
mean, but
Scott-
there is
Scott
some
will
huge
tell you
traffic
that.
levels
I've got
that
a
we're
call
talking about in Washington. But I still think, I don't necessarily disagree, but at the same time, I think there's plenty of people. There's plenty of traffic, there's plenty of everything, and so I kind of disagree with your overall concept, there's, you don't, but this path. I don't think so.
Why isn't it filled then?
Why isn't it filled then?
Yeah,
I don't know. Well, think.
well, I can
think
tell you
about
because they
from-
do a feasibility study and they say it doesn't work.
So
That's what
just,
businesses do.
just think about from 1500 north to Lowe's in Ogden, that whole stretch on the east side and most on the west side has never filled with commercial. And Ogden's a big commercial
That's my
sales
point.
tax base, like, but that area hasn't built, so it's just, it will come, maybe 10, 15, 20 years from
Yeah,
now,
we
but
can't keep it.
we have zero control to force a business to come. It's
Well,
frustrating.
Right, but at the same time, what I'm saying is that we don't put 4-story apartments along Washington Boulevard, up and down, or put it,
I
5 more storage units, but, I mean, I think the point is that we need to strategically think about that corridor. I mean, if they come, they come, but at the same time, I don't wanna,
Gotta have it available.
Right.
One of the things we are doing though is looking at that Kings area. The plans that, we've got money to get some plans there, like, I honestly, I could see if that could come together, how this could maybe grow, just from a straight business perspective. We just changed the look of that a little bit, and I think it could have impact. I really do. I think that there's ways to, and we've gotten money, we've put together a plan there. We're taking strides. I think, but as a body, we need to kind of look at that and say, how can we solve it?
And we, through the RDA grant process, are providing Dave Means, the property owner over there, $110,000 to do some parking improvements and landscaping enhancements. But his interest as the owner of the building that has Jones Shirts and Signs and the laundromat in it, was zero in reinvesting in the building.
That's not enough money to raise Pizza Pie Cafe. and
Yeah,
gym
and
next
he
door.
talked about, he said, well, I've talked to these tenants and if I put $150,000 or $200,000 into refacing the building and improving it and doing a new signage and all these things, I'm gonna have to double their rents.
Yeah.
And then you're gonna lose good Ogden businesses because the rents have doubled. So
Yeah.
we're at it's a really interesting
We
position
talked
in
about
some of those.
a three-legged stool
Yeah.
and all 3 legs have to be built at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's Haley's comment situation sort of, but I think that's what we're waiting for, right? I mean, it's a flash of lightning when.
true, but I mean, when you start thinking about all the things the city has to take care of, and then all of a sudden we have this little thing called a pool that we need to somehow figure out how we're getting 300K per year to depreciate all the stuff that we're putting into it. Was it $2 million? Anyway, I mean, it's just one of those things that you get hit with that, and then you get hit with the fact that, if you don't have any other commercial come in, you're raising property taxes by 20% every year. I
We
mean,
need to
that's-
do commercial planning. There's no question
Yeah.
about that. We need to be aggressive.
And if there was a way to work on the general plan little by little and tweak it as we go, then we could keep up with that all at the same time. But my worry is that we redid it in 2022, and so
Yeah.
now 10 years down the road is the next time we can open it up. That makes it.
No, in 5 years. I think about every 5 years when you should look at especially the land use component of it.
And we did, it was originally done in 2015.
Yeah.
And then we did this tweak in 2022 to get us up to date with, with Scott and his leadership coming into the city. But it's something we talk about with the planning commission quite often is like, hey, here's the general plan, here's some, just because it's part of the policy creating role, or the policy recommending role from the planning commission to the council is, where should the general plan be headed so that we are 10 years ahead of where we should be? Or where we
Just to
are.
give you an example, the prime development we have down there below Washington Boulevard on 2700, that took 10 years to get purchased. And the prices kept going up and going up and going up. So from the developer side, here's what he's looking at. He had the opportunity to have Olive Garden come in. But he said, here's the problem. I don't make any money on parking. Because he's got to get a return on his investment, right? Any developer is going to come in saying, I bought this ground, I need a return on my investment. So he says, I don't necessarily want an Olive Garden there because they need 158 parking spots. I don't make any money off parking. Or he'll say, you know, this type of tenant will pay me $18 a square foot because of the type of business they're in. That generates, so that's how he's looking at it. He's not necessarily looking at it from the standpoint of what's going to be sales tax into the city. Now, if we have a bunch of money to dump in and say, well, we'll subsidize it, so you'll put this type of, but we don't have that kind of money laying around right now.
Well, we do.
We do?
Set it aside for RDA.
$300,000 on a $80-90 million project is like nothing to them.
Yeah. Sure, but there's other incentives that we cannot do. I mean,
Right.
there's the permit stuff. I mean, all that, there's certain things that you can't even,
I mean,
you
there's,
say no.
you could maybe lower like the transportation impact fee. That one is one where we have had businesses pull back, but the transportation impact fee exists for a reason, and it's because it's things like, I mean, Swig or Nielsen's Frozen Custard produces a boatload of cars, and those boatload of cars cost us money because we have to maintain the roads. Like every piece of asphalt the city's put down is a check we've written in perpetuity to maintain, right? So business owners all excited about a small business, and then they get their impact fee analysis and the building permit, and it's $40,000, and they say, I'm a little less interested now. But that's a drop in the bucket, knowing that you're gonna have whatever, 10,000 cars over so much time coming through that parking lot and beating up our roads.
Maybe what we ought to do, Scott, is have Councilmember Polder's point. Let's get a list of incentives we can offer.
Yeah.
See if the council's willing to do that, because when we gave money to Nielsen's, we looked at it and we said, okay, what kind of sales taxes are gonna generate? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And is it worth putting that money out there? Because it has to be a win for both parties.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, having discussions with the developers, that's what they're looking at. They're saying, ground is so expensive right now. I can only have certain kind of tenants that will generate a return for me on my investment.
Yeah. And
And then we have no other than approving site plan.
right.
And Nielsen seems like it's been a success.
Yeah.
Once
It's
they
one
got
of the highest volume ones.
And there are, so I'm gonna talk about this in staff meeting tomorrow, but there are softwares that will help us do the analysis that the developers are doing right now. So, you know, Leading Tech Development is going through things like leakage studies and what sort of businesses align with our income ratios and the, you know, demographics of the city. The city can take a more proactive approach, step forward in economic development. And it's a cost to have this software, but you know, if you find this software and you realize that, hey, what we're missing, we understand we're missing a sit-down restaurant, but it'll give you the top 20 sit-down restaurants in the nation and what are the demographics they align with. And then we can contact property owners and start to, you essentially put together like, here's a site with a business that seems to align with North Ogden and be more proactive on economic development. And that's just something that we haven't done. I mean, we had a citizen committee for economic development that would go out and knock doors and help out a little bit, but we're right now kind of at the whim of whatever Village of Commons Point can come up with or Leading Tech Development can come up with, instead of us saying, this is a list, if you reached out to these 5 20,000 square foot box tenants, because we can see that they align with North Ogden and it's needed.
So do we have a monthly meeting or a check-in with like Leading Tech, like you were saying? I mean, is that something we should be doing? Because to me, that's a huge part of what we're gonna be living with for the next.
Because we have an
years.
economic development director.
Yeah. Ryan calls the mayor.
So, we've got to be proactive. Because we have an economic development and community director.
Community and economic development. The economic development part's second. in my title.
Cause to me, well,
Software sounds like a good idea.
but talking with these,
Developers have that, so.
yeah, but talking with a developer, especially the person that's the project lead, I mean, to me, it doesn't need to be weekly. I mean, a monthly 10-minute meeting that says, hey, did you get my site plan that I submitted 2 days ago? I don't know. I mean, something like that, because, and then, you know, because a lot of this stuff is time sensitive. And we need to know, especially for the pond or the detention pond, when we need to move it. So to me, I think between you and John, I think that needs to be already 1 or 2, 1A, I don't know. Because to me, if we don't have that, then we're raising property taxes 20% a year to catch up to where we're supposed to be.
And
You
I don't think any amount of footwork that we would have done would have gotten Trader Joe's in its
No,
location.
yeah, I
Or like, and
understand. That's-
some of
that was
those
an
examples-
anecdote.
Nor would it have stopped Trader Joe's from coming
Yes.
in.
Yeah, like
Right.
those, oftentimes when a business like that sits down with you, like when a Walmart sits down with any community, that Walmart knows more about your community than you do. I mean, they have done far more demographic data and analysis, traffic analysis studies. They know they're gonna make money. So we can hope all we want to land the right tenant, and sometimes it'll happen and sometimes it won't. But to your point, the way Leading Tech is approaching that has been kind of like shoot for finding somebody and then hurry up and entitle, as opposed to what we'd like to see at the planning department will create a lot more stability is maybe create some lots, plat some lots out and then have lots available to sell. So you actually have like buildable tenant spaces, because Chipotle is a good example and it's gone now. But the first that I heard about Chipotle coming to the city was they were requesting information on their sign permit, and they didn't have a subdivision, a site plan. They didn't have any approval, like 0 approvals. And the first person who contacted me was someone asking about how tall can my pole sign be? And I'm like, well, this is what the code says, but I haven't even heard that Chipotle is coming in. And
Yes,
so,
someone from Chipotle calling saying, I need to apply for my sign permit so I can put it next to my building when we build it.
and they didn't have an entitleable building lot. So there's some things that just need to happen. And Ryan and I have had conversations, but there's a bit of a cart before the horse on that particular project that for us as staff is a little frustrating, because we'd love to see it happen in a more
That's, to
Plan,
me,
right.
that's what that monthly, bi-weekly, whatever the crap you want to call it, should be.
Yeah.
Because if there's nothing between September and January or something, what's the point? I mean, when I did my little drive-by and they know what they want to work with us. So it's one of those things, it's like, and if, they submit something and they don't know if it's even submitted, who do they call? And that's kind of the thing that I'd love to, I don't want to interject myself, but I will if I need to. I mean, I don't.
Well, but I think it's a good point is that some coordinated effort and we want Ryan to be successful. And so we'll figure out something with him. Because, he doesn't want every council member swinging by his office.
Well, don't deal with him, deal with Alexis, because she's
Sorry,
the one.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
Alexis doesn't want every council member swinging by their office.
She's not a decision maker. Once the decision's made, she's the executor.
True, but that's
She doesn't,
where, yeah,
you know.
but at the same time,
The conversation I had with Ryan is get with our economic development director. I refer him to Scott. Now, whether he's gone with Scott or not, if Scott's gone with him or not, I guess John's gonna have to tell us that because Scott reports to him. But we do need to be proactive. I agree.
like 100%, like,
I agree.
so I don't get any more heart attacks.
That's where it's all motivated from right there.
Sure is.
Good point.
And that's also part of the reason we don't announce companies, right? Because 3 months ago, we were told it was coming here.
Yep.
And then we saw that Riverdale was announcing something and I think I watched it live and I was like, it's Trader Joe's, it's Trader Joe's. We were told they were coming here. So it's just this weird economic development's a funny game.
Pleasantview said it was coming there too.
Yeah, Pleasantview thought it was coming there, but because they were out shopping northern Davis, Weber County. And the reality is, if Kings Plaza had been empty, that might have been where they landed because they love that not quite run down space, but they can get in. I mean, they're gonna be open doors in 9 months, right? Whereas if they were here, it's 2 years to build. So that's just, anyways, I'm sorry, we're like so far off the general plan topic. I'm sorry, Scott.
no, this is, it's all.
Okay, what else on the general plan?
One quick question, it
What's our summary here?
promises the last question, but you say it's in process to be, like, you assume that it will be approved and that we'll get that money What's the timeline there?
Sorry, which part?
Uh,
Our moderate income housing thing? So, I don't know what their re-review timeframe is. It was December, I mean, they had to be in by December 22nd, but they gave us no promises on how long it would take for them to approve or not approve. There's 200 and, I'm gonna get it wrong, Cameron Deal would smack me. It's like 256 cities and towns in the state of Utah. 80 of them are required, are a population that are required to submit moderate income housing plans. And, last year, it was less than 50% that made it through. We were one of them that made it through. This year was a little bit better than that, but it was like 25 to 30% were failed. And then have this cure report they had to do to fix it. And we get our VNC road monies. When do they go?
Quarterly, they give
Yeah.
us.
So those come in little chunks
Oh, okay.
quarterly. So,
And we haven't had any restrictions with that, right?
No,
no.
no, not yet.
That's what I thought.
And I would imagine, because I haven't penalized anyone in the state yet. If they do, I think that there would be a conversation with legislators, the governor's office, the realtors, or not the realtors, the home builders who are kind of the ones pushing it. And just sit down and say, look, like this, here's what's broken about the process, right? I mean, Scott and I can go meet with Chris Cambrulis and have that conversation. Who's kind of, he works right at your homes, but they're the ones that are pushing it. Of course. So.
So summary of the discussion. I didn't hear anybody say, jump up and down, we should vest the general plan right now. But we ought to continue to look at it, modify it. Did you jump up and down?
I want to do that just to get his chair. To get these like in a bargain bin from IKEA. Like, are they painful anyone? Do you want to go into that?
Yeah.
No.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Great.
They're painful.
Oh, we don't want to go into it.
No, it's, no,
Looking to see, when we watch certification required zoning. But the council, if you have any feelings of different wanting to address that, we ought to be thinking about that. But I do think it's important that we continue to look at it. Things change quickly. Okay, anything else? Scott?
No.
John? All right, any public comments this evening, either online or here in person?
Do have one online.
Okay, I see no one present that wants to make a comment, but let's hear from whoever is online.
Susan Kilborn.
Hi, Susan Kilborn, North Ogden, Utah, also Lakeview Heights. I have a question, and maybe Scott might be the best one to answer this. You were talking about townhomes and duplexes, but I have not heard anybody talk about twin homes. Are you aware that twin homes are completely different than duplexes and townhomes? And I'll tell you why. My extremely handsome husband and I downsized, and we live in what is called a twin home. The difference between a duplex and a twin home is that on our side, there are 10 inches of concrete. And between my neighbor and I, there is 5 feet of dead space. And then on my neighbor's side, there's another 10 inches of concrete. Our title on our home is called a single family residence. It is not a duplex. When my son got out of the Air Force, he moved to St. George, lived in a duplex. I went down there, holy hell. Oops, sorry. It was so noisy. You could hear everything. You could hear toilets flushing. Where we are, you hear nothing. And I'm wondering if anybody has looked at, when you talk about 2-family dwellings, if there can be something that is more driven towards twin homes. Because up here, I guarantee you, I drive by, and most of you who come up here to Lakeview for whatever, you'll see some duplexes and they look like crap. But if you drive around the neighborhood and look at the cul-de-sacs that have twin homes, you will find that they are very nicely maintained. So I just wanted to throw that out there as a comment.
Yeah, that's a good comment. My response would be that as far as planning vernacular goes, twin home and duplex are used essentially the same way. The main difference between the two is that whether you say duplex or twin home, but a duplex might be one property with 2 units on it, so they're not individually sellable, where a twin home has the property line that kind of bifurcates or separates that home altogether. So then you end up with a 1/4 acre lot where 1/8 of the acre lot and half of the house is owned as one ownership piece and the other side is owned as one ownership piece. I wish that they built houses the way they built that house that you're in right now, because we by state code cannot require anything beyond what the fire separation would be required between a share walled single family home. And there's all sorts of, that's essentially what it's called, is it's an attached single family home, whether you use the word twin home, duplex, they can be used interchangeably, but we can't go in and require a 5-foot airspace. I wish we could, because you could create some really nice homes. So that comes down to the building community and what they want to do in their finances. So.
Okay.
Scottsdale Estate, talking to John, Scottsdale Estates is basically what she just described, down on about 2200 north, 600 east. There.
Yeah.
Anything else, Susan?
No, I was just gonna say, as far as saleability and attracting people who are gonna actually live here, and you're talking about building a community and curb appeal and wanting individuals who are going to take ownership of their property and make it like the community that they're living in. A twin home to me is so much more attracting way more people who are going to be willing to do that. And that was just a comment I want to make. Thank
very
you,
much.
guys.
Anyone else, Sean?
Nope.
Who would change their mind here? Okay. We'll move on to item 7. Any comments from the commissioners? Like to make? Any comments from staff? John? Brian?
I have a comment.
Yes.
I just wanted to remind everybody to check their emails. I sent out an email about the conflict of interest forms. If you guys could get me that within the week, that would be wonderful. They will be posted on our website. And then I wanted to share a comment that I got via phone call today from a Liberty resident. She drives down 2600 every day to work. And she just wanted to thank the city for putting out such a beautiful Christmas display and a nativity set. She thinks it's really beautiful, and she wanted me to pass that along to the city council and to the administration, that's something that she notices every day and really enjoys. And that's the end of my comments, sir.
Council.
And pay specific attention to that due date is January 31st. If it's not in, then we're actually obligated by the state to give you 3 days and then to fine you $300.
Yes.
We can't waive it. It's a state requirement. So just get it in. Ryan can notarize it. Joyce can notarize it. Katie can notarize it.
We also have a front desk receptionist that also has her notary. And I put it early for next week on the 14th, I believe, in the email to give everybody plenty of time, so no fines.
We just resigned, so it won't be fine.
And if you're on another entity, like the sewer board requires it to, you only have to do it once. The city can use the sewer boards, or the sewer boards can use the city, you just have to do it once. Okay, thank you, Ryan. Anything else?
Yeah, one more thing. I'm sorry, it just came to mind. Also, if any of you have any interest in attending the local officials day, please send me an email by tomorrow so I can get you guys registered.
Okay. Council? Councilman Polk.
They're just gonna ignore.
No,
Just the budget committee, got one more and I think we should have 6. So I'll kind of finalize that and kind of figure out, maybe just talk with you, Mayor, about what direction or you know, how do we want to approach it again, but anyways, that's some work. And then just a thought, I don't know, I kind of haven't coalesced it in my brain yet, but yeah, going through the general plan again, there's a lot of things that we discussed that we'd like to do. But I guess the question is, are we doing it staff wise and otherwise? I don't know. So I guess that would be a question if that's an agenda item, if we have an opening, but you know, if there's a non-busy week that we could at least discuss it in an open forum, because I don't know, there's a lot of questions I had going through it again that I don't know. So just a thought.
I have no comments this evening. So with that, we look for a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Motion to adjourn.